My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds or geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we get ready for Oscar season, although I guess this will be released after, right? After the Oscars?
Yes, I think the Oscars are happening this... Well, okay, yeah, at the time of our recording, it'll be this Sunday, but this episode will go out on Tuesday, so the Oscars will already have happened. So we don't know anything about who won. I hope Top Gun Maverick wins Best Picture, even though it will not.
I mean, no, it who knows?
I actually want everything...
I just recently today watched like 3 videos about the Oscar, one of which was lamenting the fact that Puss in Boots and it wasn't in the running for Best Picture. But it was more of our general rant about why animation isn't getting much recognition at the Oscars recently, but still.
I actually want Everything Everywhere All at Once to win, because I actually really like that movie.
There's a good chance, like that one actually probably has a good chance of winning.
Yeah, once again, I've made this complaint every year on our podcast. They opened it up from 5 nominees for Best Picture to 10, so that movies like The Dark Knight wouldn't be left out again. And yet, of the 10 they picked this year, only Top Gun and Avatar are like the crowd pleasers. How the Batman didn't get, like, I think it's only nominated for like sound editing and visual effects. And I was like, Come on, the cinematography in that movie, the music.
Yeah, especially because there weren't, again, that many movies released this year. And yeah, I was looking at some of the ones that were there, and it doesn't really seem to be particularly good ones. Like, yeah.
I think the only place where comic book movies might actually win something is Angela Bassett's performance in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever as supporting actress, which, you know, considering the first Black Panther was that first Marvel movie to be nominated for Best Picture and the sequel wasn't able to continue, that says something. We're going to do something different here. Usually we open our mail in the Bat Jar after we've talked about whatever we're talking about, but today, just as like a reminder to everybody that you can send us messages, we have yet another message from Dante DeLuca, who has been apparently making his way through all of our episodes.
Hi, in one of the episodes I was listening to recently, there was some discussion of updating the host introduction clips before the theme song. It was also recently decided that Mjolnir should be considered a host now rather than a guest. I hope this means she is going to get an introduction in segment 2. She certainly deserves one. Smiley face.
And to that, Dante, I say, I'm sorry. There was a period, I feel like it went on for at least a few months, where Mjolnir was pretty consistently part of every episode.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jam Jam kind of makes it a little bit difficult for both the parents to be recording a podcast. I think... Like, honestly, that is one of the bigger, like, the pregnancy and then the fact that one of us kind of needs to be with her while the other one's doing the podcast. So maybe we could alternate as hosts, but it's a little difficult to do at this point.
Yeah, and I feel like since she's been less available, like, she has done a lot of funneling her thoughts through you. Like, I've heard you say more, oh, Mjolnir was saying this, or Mjolnir had this to say.
Yeah, and I mean, when there is something that particularly interests her, she does specifically. I mean, I think I usually give her credit for, I give her credit for the ideas that are hers, but she does often, tell me things that she's interested, or I know whenever we do something Marvel, I try to ask her if there was something she wanted to say or talk about, because she's still very Marvelicious
And
despite everything that's happened.
yeah, Dante does make a point about like updating the host introduction things. I think yours still says that there's been a recent insurgency of D&D.
Oh, we talked about this at some point, didn't we?
I know we keep saying it, but we haven't done it yet.
I mean, yeah, it's
like
yeah,
you're leading a
D&D has
D&D
very
club at
much
your school
become-
now.
Hmm?
You're leading a D&D club at your school where you teach. I think that's what goes way beyond a recent insurgency of something.
I mean, yes and no. It's still more recent than it is still my most recent nerd or geekdom fandom thing that I've participated in, like that I've started, if that makes sense. Like I still, yeah, I don't know. I still haven't really gotten into something since then, right? Because like I'm thinking about other things that I nerdy or geeky that I've done, and like the last big thing I did before D&D was Warhammer, and I still like enjoy Warhammer lore, and like it often works its way into my D&D campaigns and stuff like that. But I haven't really done anything new since then.
But I mean, it's been like 3 years since you started hosting the podcast. Like, at what point is it still considered new?
Yeah, that's true. I'm DMing a little bit more, but it's yeah. I guess I still find it to be a more recent thing. Like, what are the other things? Because the other things I was talking about was like Belgium comics, which I've been into since before I could read, right? And like, literature. I've been reading books and been more interested in books for a long time. I guess anime started at the end of like my last 2 years of high school, so that's still been over a decade, whereas D&D is still less than a decade into the fandom.
Well, thank you, Dante, for messaging us once again. Maybe we will finally get around to changing our intros. I've noticed for myself, I have a hard time saying the word geek. Like, I just don't, the way my voice sounds when I say geek, it feels like I have to like work really hard to enunciate it.
Interesting.
Does it sound weird to you, or is that just me?
Well, I mean, we're always way more self-conscious when we listen to ourselves over a recording, right? And I mean, it's one of the reasons I often don't re-listen to the episodes after we record them, because I still hate hearing the sound of my voice on a recording, and it still feels weird to me. I mean, you have to edit, like, because you edit, I'm guessing you are a lot more used to it than I am, because you're forced to re-listen to them. I'm not, so I don't always. In fact, I seldom do. Which is probably why, like, I should maybe just re-listen to the introduction recently and be like, oh yeah, this still represents me, or no, you're right, we should update. If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
You know, Beeper, in our last episode, we kind of left everyone on a cliffhanger because I needed to use the bathroom, so we didn't announce what we were going to be doing in this episode.
Yep.
And I told you beforehand we were going to do news stories today, but I'm actually I'm going to surprise you here. We are going to use this episode to talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Oh, okay. That sounds good.
And I'm not worried at all if you haven't seen this yet, because I know for a fact you will not like this movie, because there are several elements of it that contain complaints you've had about the MCU before. So if anything, it's just going to continue just going to like benefit your Marvel fatigue.
Because I have seen a grand total of one review for the movie, and yeah, pretty much the review was, this is the worst, like, this movie represents everything that has gone wrong with the MCU, was kind of the upshot of what he said. So yeah, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it.
So secret origin segments here. From what I recall, you're a fan of Edgar Wright, the filmmaker.
Immensely, yes.
Who was originally involved with the first Ant-Man movie. and then he like partway through the production or pre-production he left, and so the movie still had a bit of his flair to it because things that he had established for the story or the whatever were there. So can I assume you still enjoyed the first Ant-Man?
Oh, I actually Ant-Man and the Wasp was one of my favorite Phase 3 movies as well. Like, I enjoy the franchise. I yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I like the first one better. I think I enjoyed the second one more than the other films that were coming out around it. Rather, like, obviously Endgame was, or sorry, Infinity Wars was Infinity Wars. I didn't like Endgame that much, actually. I felt it was a little overbloated, but I also didn't see it in theaters, so I feel like it was kind of an event thing that I should have gone, and I didn't, so I missed the train on it. Missed the boat. I can't remember. My English is my second language, guys, so give me a break. But yeah, I quite enjoyed the Ant-Man movies, but I just, yeah, if it also seems like, by all accounts, they once again failed at establishing what the multiverse is and why it should needs to be protected.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know.
So
I've
what is it
enjoyed
you liked
Ant-Man and
about
the
the
Wasp
Ant-Man films?
generally.
Just to be clear, like so that I can compare it to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. What did you actually like about those first two movies?
I liked the just Scott Lang as a character. I mean, Paul Rudd is a great actor, and he pulled it off quite well. The relationship with his daughter was really good in the first two movies. But then they changed the actress, and that didn't go so well. And just the side characters were really well executed. And also, oh, sorry, Jam Jam is putting in her 2 cents. I do. It might be my Ultron bias, but I actually enjoy Hank Pym as a character, even though he's objectively a bad person. I think in the comics, it is actually something that I like and that I find very enjoyable. Like, not enjoyable necessarily. I don't enjoy bad people, but like, they really lean into the fact that, like, this is the guy nobody likes, but he's still trying his best to do good. And I think they did kind of translate that into Hank Pym in these movies, where it was like, yeah, a lot of people dislike him, and they're right to dislike him, but he's still trying to make a difference.
Okay, so I wrote all those down because we'll have to refer back to them. For me, when the first Ant-Man came out, Ant-Man was a character I didn't really care about, and that movie made me care about Ant-Man. They chose to do the legacy hero thing with him, where it was about the passing of the mantle from Hank Pym to Scott Lang, which I know upset some comics fans because Hank Pym is generally the longest running Ant-Man in the comics, and then Scott Lang is like a temporary replacement.
But at the same time, they'd already made, like, Hank Pym is also most famous for being the guy who created Ultron, and they didn't do that. So, like, I feel like he didn't really have the normal space, like the space he normally has in the Marvel continuity in the MCU anyways. So, like, I think it was a good idea, and, you know, and unlike a lot of the passing of the torch that have happened more recently, it didn't seem like it's because we have an actor who's retiring and we need to do this. It was kind of part and parcel of the plot, right?
And I mean, also another element of the character from the comics that didn't make it into the MCU really was the relationship between Janet Van Dyne as the Wasp and Hank Pym as Ant-Man. Like, they have a very, I'll say, I guess, interesting relationship. Like, marriage, love, domestic abuse. Like, there's a lot going on there. That the movies, basically kind of skirted their way around by implying that there was a history there. But then when we, meet the characters in the first Ant-Man movie, Janet is missing.
Yeah, and they also they went, like, and again, like, I didn't dislike what they did with Hank Pym, because they kept a lot of the, like, he's made bad decisions in his life and he's ruined some of his good relationships because of it. They just lean a little less into, the actual physical abuse and really bad stuff that I understand is not something you like to put in a movie.
So I liked the legacy character element of Ant-Man. I really liked the heist movie element. It made it its own little kind of subgenre of the MCU where, committing, like, I enjoy those kind of movies, just like Ocean's 11 type things. And then with the Ant-Man powers, it made the heists just that much more interesting. And I actually appreciated the movie's approach to humor. I've openly said many times haven't been as huge a fan of movies like Thor Ragnarok or the Guardians of the Galaxy, where humor comes in to interrupt moments where you're supposed to feel something dramatic. And with Ant-Man, it's like, yeah, they're full of humor, especially with the side characters. But the humorous moments never seem to take away from the moments where I was supposed to actually feel something. And as a fan of superhero comics, I appreciate it when the filmmakers are not like making fun of the characters that I care about.
I think that was one of the good ideas about how they picked and how they use the side characters, is that they deliver most of the humor away from where the action is happening, right? Well, even when there are jokes between like Hank Pym and Scott Lang, it's usually not in the heat of the moment, right? It's not quippy while fighting, which, let's be honest, only Spider-Man can do properly. It's very much just like after the fact of like, why did you do that? And, that's where they put the comedy in. It's not, yeah, I hadn't thought of it, but it really does a very good job of not cutting into the action. And I'm going to go ahead and credit Edgar Wright for that, because he is very good at randomly incorporating humor in places where you don't think it would work, but it does.
Ant-Man the Wasp, which came out after Infinity War but before Endgame, but was a prequel to Infinity War because it takes place before Infinity War. People complained at the time that it was a small movie, that it was a small story, and, pun intended, the characters who shrink, but that ultimately it was a very personal story, and it's just what happened in the movie didn't matter to the larger universe. Was like they were just trying to have their own personal stuff sorted out. And it was, for me at least, appreciated after how big Infinity War was to have a smaller story to tie in.
Yeah, I think that was part of what I really liked about it. And I know that's definitely something Mjolnir really enjoyed about the first two Ant-Man movies, is that they were personal story, because I think it was a very good choice to make for those movies, because both of them were coming in at like more climactic points in the MCU. And instead of trying to up the stakes, they kind of just fell back on something that was more personal but still worked. And I think, they tried to do that with some of the shows, like Ms. Marvel. Ms. Marvel was at its best when it was a lot more of a personal story, and when it was less about the cosmic djinns trying to fight. And I think that at its best, the MCU can do that very well. And I think those two were the best movies that kind of embodied that.
That's true. I didn't think about that. Both Ant-Man and then Ant-Man and the Wasp followed Avengers movies. So, yeah. Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania, which some people get confused, like, is this Ant-Man 3 or is it Ant-Man the Wasp 2? Because Ant-Man the Wasp is like a separate thing, or is it whatever? It's the third Ant-Man movie. It was originally supposed to come out this July. It was supposed to come out this summer. And then in a Doom's delay, they basically swapped out the releases of the Marvels and Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania.
Yeah, which I have a theory about that.
Well, before you share that theory,
yeah, okay.
There's a further Doom's delay is that the Marvels has now been moved to November.
Yeah, I know.
2023.
That movie just keeps moving.
Yep. And apparently it's having another round of reshoots. Apparently it's got some problems.
I mean, it's in a tough place right now. And it's also trying to follow up some of the less popular IPs and of the MCU. which is also kind of a difficult thing, and they're probably putting a lot of effort to try to rectify that. But at some point, you do eventually need to release it, unless maybe maybe Marvel is just, or Disney is just planning to Batgirl it.
Yeah, that seems unlikely at this point. I will say it's been, I think we've talked about even here. Bob Iger has been reinstated as the head of the Walt Disney Company, and Jam Jam really wants Beeper's glasses for some reason. And she took him away right immediately. But Bob Iger's been reinstated as the head of Disney because Disney's been losing money, and he's been told that they're going to focus on quality over quantity. So some of the things that have already happened for Marvel is they've scaled back on the number of Disney Plus shows that are coming out this year. Now we're only getting Loki season 2 and Secret Invasion, whereas originally there were like 2 or 3 other ones going to be coming out as well. And yeah, the Marvels has been pushed ahead. I think when we did our Marvel phase 4, phase 5, whatever episode, we talked about how there was like an 8-month period where there was going to be no Marvel movie. Because there was going to be the Marvels in July and then nothing until like the following February. So this actually works to their advantage that there's like a gap of time that they can fill. But it is kind of concerning. I think things are not going as well at the House of Mouse as they once were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a number of other things that are kind of going on around that, but I think, the quality over quality over quantity seems to be like what everybody's been asking for. So that's probably just, I don't know. To me, seems like a no-brainer. If you're going to change direction, use that as an excuse to start doing it. Because I mean, Star Wars could also use that. Because they have made quality products, but then they also just did a bunch that didn't go very well.
Yeah, I'm watching The Bad Batch right now, and it's really good in season 2, and The Mandalorian season 3 just started.
Oh, how have you started that one?
I've seen the first episode, but the second one came out today. I have not watched it yet.
I haven't gotten there yet, but
The Book of Boba Fett is required reviewing though, because like, it just sort of the
Which
story
is
just
what
picks
we all
up from that.
when we watch the Book of Boba Fett. It's just, hopefully it can keep up quality, because like they really can't afford a dip after Andor. That was like probably the best Star Wars product to come out since they finished Clone Wars.
I mean, I really liked Obi-Wan Kenobi, but
but you have an obsession with the character.
Yeah, so that has nothing to do with it. I swear. All right, so Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania. You haven't seen the movie, so here's what Box Office Mojo says the story is.
Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne, along with Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, explore the quantum realm, where they interact with strange creatures and embark on an adventure that goes beyond the limits of what they thought was possible.
Now, does that sound like a small story to you?
Not exactly, which is weird, because my understanding first off was that a lot of these characters mentioned here have very minor roles in the movie, and that they were trying to focus more around the relationship between Scott Lang and his daughter, but no, it definitely does not. It sounds very grandiose, very like, but also it's a very vague premise. Which,
yes.
Most of the, like, and I get it, most of these things are trying not to spoil anything, but if it was a more personal story, that should have made it into a description.
Now, this is only the second MCU movie after Eternals to have a Rotten Tomato. And, we've said before that Rotten Tomatoes is not a perfect measure of quality, but it is something to say that 372 movie critics have evaluated Quantumania, and it has 47%.
Ouch. Yeah, that's bad.
Now, when I went and saw the movie, I was expecting it to be really bad because I'd heard it was rotten, and it was okay. But I think we're seeing more and more of the Marvel fatigue that you've spoken about, just actually in the public consciousness, where people just aren't as excited about these things anymore, and if it feels too much like things they've seen before, they're less inclined to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think, like, I also I don't know if this is better or worse with the placement of the Marvels or Secret Invasion, like, but it also felt like, to me, part of why they put it forward is they really wanted to. I don't think this is a spoiler. He was in the trailer. Yeah, he was in the trailer. Like, they want to push Kang into the world a little bit like they did Thanos, except from what I understand, he's got much more of a prominent figure than just being, a hidden figure in the background, which Thanos was for a while. But I think they're trying to push that because they want people to get hyped again. Because I think a lot of the Marvel fatigue is also the hype is dying. It's not just that people have seen it a lot; it's also that there really isn't much to get excited about, like, unless you're a big fan of one of the characters they're putting in, right? Because I think that, like, that was part of what made, Guardians of the Galaxy work, is, like, not a lot of people cared about that character, but they cared about the tie-in that it had with Thanos, and that made people more excited, right? Even though objectively Guardians was a good movie, and so that also got people excited, but, like, there was a through line, which they're kind of lacking right now.
I've listened to a lot of people's reviews and commentary on Quantumania, and people are just being more critical, I think, than they used to be of Marvel movies. I think people, their expectations are just, because Marvel's done so many like amazing movies, their expectations are sky high. And so every time there's a movie that falls short of their expectations, they're inclined to dislike it. And it's like, either it's too much of the same, or it's too radically different, it seems.
Yeah, but I think that's a fairly normal thing. Like, look at even just any Pixar movie that isn't amazing. People start, like, Pixar has done some recently, like, solid movies, but that people are like, "Oh, this I can't believe this is the same studio who did Toy Story 3." And, like, cuz it is hard to keep making amazing thing after amazing thing, especially when you pick up the pace. And so I think there is an aspect of the fatigue, but I think there is also just an aspect of, you know, because, again, a lot of people I have, listened to keep bringing up the point of, like, how could you reset after all the stakes and everything that Infinity Wars and, you know, um, like the Infinity War saga was, right? Like, after that, what can you do that will satisfy people? And it's really hard to build up to that.
Yeah, I firmly believe that I don't think the MCU is ever going to be as popular or as successful as it was. I think there's a lot of people in like the general public who said after Endgame, okay, I'm done. I'm not interested in, like, I've followed the story for 10 years. I'm kind of done with it.
And,
More
like,
and more people I know, like, that's their response, is
yeah,
like, I'm
and I
not
think it's
interested in this
normal.
anymore.
Like, I mean, how many shows can keep up? Like, because, I mean, I know it's a series of movies, but if you did look at it as a TV show, like, how many shows, unless they're extremely formulaic and people like that formula, last more than 10 years? And even there, like, the amount of shows that can last more than 10 years, usually limited to animation or sitcoms, right? And to have done that with, like, the MCU still managed to pull off a series of movies that made a coherent story over 10 years, like, that's impressive. But now it seems like it's just starting to force things a little.
Yeah, so that's one reason I know you won't like this movie, because it does represent Marvel fatigue. At least that's how it's, and even with the box office, it was number 1, but it's looking like it's probably not even going to make as much money as the second Ant-Man did. Which, considering like Thor Love and Thunder and Wakanda Forever were still able to make like 700-800 million dollars.
Yeah.
Like right now, it's been almost a
And
month
Ant-Man
since.
and the Wasp came out, like you said, right at, like, between Infinity Wars and Endgame. Like, a lot of people skipped it because they just wanted to get Endgame, right?
Another reason I know you won't like this movie is because I've heard your complaint many times in Phase 4 about how Marvel is approaching the multiverse, and once again, like how they talk about the multiverse in this one, especially with Kang, it's it's close to what they say in Loki, but it's still not 100% coherent.
Yeah, because well, it is like I don't know if this is asking for spoilers, but like, was Kang in the quantum universe before the timelines were allowed to split? Because he
Yeah,
shouldn't be, because the other Kang there was supposed to keep all Kangs in check.
yeah, it's kind of confusing. It makes it sound that Kang War happened, and then the Kang we see in this movie was like exiled to the quantum realm.
Yeah, instead of just being spliced out of existence. Like, I feel like if there's, I don't know, if you're controlling the entire timeline and there's a timeline where there's Kang in the quantum realm, just splice the quantum rail or make it disappear or do something. I don't
Needless
know.
to say, you'd be frustrated because I'm like, I mean, I didn't rewatch the last episode of Loki to like see how consistent what was told in the movie matched up with the show, but it still was confusing as to like, okay, what is the how did all this work and who is this King compared to the other ones, and then yeah, it's still a mess, and it's interesting also. I keep hearing again less comic book people being like the multiverse introducing the multiverse means that like nothing matters because it's like even if a character dies there's another version of them somewhere, and I'm like regardless if there's an alternate version somewhere, it's like this world and like this character that these people know is still dying. So I think there's a disconnect between like the average person and the idea of
Yeah,
the multiverse. Like just your average person, not your average
they,
Joe, of course, but your average
yeah.
person can't appreciate the multiverse as a storytelling tool.
I think they also kind of, yeah, but as far as comic fans go, like, they also shot themselves in the foot by calling the MCU 616 in in Doctor Strange. Like, that was a terrible faux pas because 616 is the current comic continuity. The MCU cannot also be that because it's very different. And I know it's a small detail, but again, it's like you said, you would have had to rewatch the last episode of Loki to see if it was coherent. You shouldn't have to scrutinize that. That should be the job of the writers who are working on all these related, supposedly same universe ish kind of movies, like, and make sure they are coherent.
Now, my video's frozen, but I think you can still hear me, right? One thing I heard about the film before it came out was that it was written by somebody who had worked on Rick and Morty, which at the time was kind of scary because I'm like, I have seen a little bit of Rick and Morty. I don't necessarily love it, but I know there's lots of people that do love it. And then watching the movie, I'm like, yeah, this was very clearly written by somebody who worked on Rick and Morty because a lot of the humor or like even the absurdist science fiction elements of the movie, like clearly, like this could easily just been pulled out of an episode of Rick and Morty.
Yeah, that's I do have issues with the Rick and Morty multiverse and how they're handling it. Although a more well, anyways, the end of the last season kind of addressed some of the issues I had, but then also like Rick and Morty is falling apart because the right now the creator is gone who voiced both Rick and Morty. So like you lost the main voice actor for the two main characters and the original creator, but there was always this kind of thing like where they were they treat their multiverse much more kind of the way that that montage in Doctor Strange into the Multiverse of Madness, that one montage where they go through things treats a multiverse, but then the rest of the movie didn't do that. Um, and so it probably isn't good because that's the other thing is like the MCU is trying or should be trying, and I think in some cases is to be a serious, coherent entity. Throwing in a guy that worked on a show that is like, yeah, no, we pretty much know something is going on, but we don't really care. Ha ha, fart joke. Okay, Rick and Morty is better than just that, although it's devolving into that, but like Rick and Morty doesn't take its premise very seriously. it's based around characters, it's based around relationships. If you try to put that same level of lack of logic and weird nihilism into a series that you want people to take seriously, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, there's not quite the nihilism of Rick and Morty here, but just the kind of the humor that I didn't like in the other MCU movies has crept its way into the Ant-Man movies now. Like you mentioned liking Hank Pym as a character. In this movie, he's basically there to like spout out one-liners. Like they meet an alien who has a set of broccoli for a head, and he's like, "Wow, that guy looks like broccoli." And then there's a gag involving ants that he comes in like, and that's part of his story in the movie. So as far as like the Hank Pym character, that all the things you liked about the first two movies, those do not really come into play here at all.
That's very unfortunate because like I think the Ant-Man movies were striking a good balance and were a good palate cleanser. Actually, I think that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed both the Ant-Man movies and the Guardian of the Galaxy movies, is because they very much did serve as palate cleansers for the overall what's happening in the MCU. And if it fails to be that, then it starts to lose a lot of its charm.
You mentioned liking Scott Lang as a character. He very much has a flat character arc in this movie. He does not really change. There's like one nuance of his character that's different at the end of the movie from the beginning, but for the most part, he's a happy guy who, is famous because he helped save the world at the beginning, and at the end, he's a famous guy who helped save the world.
Oh, so because that is another big criticism of the MCU as a whole, which I don't know if we ever talked about on the podcast, but which is definitely something that you do see as a trend, is that the heroes are more and more fighting to keep the status quo rather than help. And so you get a lot of the initial setting of the stories are exactly the same as the ending or the setting at the end of the stories, which, if anybody's ever looked at a plot diagram, you see, you got the initial setting that goes flat, you go up, down, but you never go back to the same place because that means the story is pointless.
Yeah, like there's one thing in the finale where I'm like, oh, this is interesting. They're going to do something with this. And then they don't. And then finally, the third thing you liked about the first two movies also is, kind of off here. Obviously, with Endgame, they Cassie Lang aged up, so they had a different actress play her in Endgame. But then, for whatever reason, they recast her with a different actress for this one. And apparently, the actress who played Cassie in Endgame found out she wasn't going to be in this one when they announced the cast. Like, she found on social media that somebody else was playing the part in this movie, and I'm like, what was like? I guess she's a bigger name. She's more famous, but I'm like, that's harsh. Like, you couldn't even tell her herself or tell them yourself.
Just bring back the girl who played Cassie in the first two movies and just put some CGI or makeup on her. She was definitely the best one. Like, she was not only genuinely a good child actress, but like she had good chemistry, and they I don't know. She just clearly, oh, what's the name of the guy who plays?
Which actress?
No, the actor.
Paul Rudd.
The guy who plays Scott Lang.
Oh, Paul Rudd.
Yeah. Clearly, she and Paul Rudd had good chemistry and worked well together. Much better than the Cassie and the that they recast. And yeah, she was just a good actress, and she played the role really well. And yeah, I still don't fully get why they didn't just try to give her makeup that makes her age. I mean,
look, she's only 14 years old now.
Yeah, but teenagers can be made to look older. I don't know. I feel but I also feel if she's 14, she's significantly older than in the first movie, so that she's not like a child anymore. So she probably could still pull off the role. I don't know. Just there are people who don't grow and who don't look that much older from 14 to 20. You could just keep somebody who's doing a good job instead of recasting. I understand why they did it, but I'm still not a fan of it.
anyway, her relationship, like Cassie's relationship with Scott, it is a central part of the film because they all get trapped in the quantum realm and he's worried about getting her home. But instead of like the cute father-daughter thing, now we have her as like a young adult kind of like challenging him and being like, why aren't you doing more to help, use your Ant-Man suit for good? Because he's kind of just resting on his laurels. And, we find out that she's got her own suit now and that she's been kind of like doing stuff without telling him. And it's not the same kind of relationship I think you enjoyed with the original movies.
Yeah. It's also, I don't know, it's this weird thing where like, I don't know, does she have like a concrete plan or examples? Because I feel like that's another thing that, Phase 4, I know this is technically the beginning of Phase 5, but that Phase 4 has been doing is like putting all these ideals and ideas that something should change, but never what it is or never actually seeing that change. Because, like, Snowy Owl definitely had that. It was like, things need to change, but how? You need to do better as politicians, right? And then, in Miss Marvel, there was kind of that, yeah, things need to change, but what exactly? Like, they were starting to talk about things that need to change, but didn't really introduce anything. She-Hulk could have started introducing legal changes that are happening in the world, but that never really happened at all. Like, there's a lot of things that just kind of get set up that seem to indicate that there are ideas for what the MCU could do, but they never really give something concrete. They just give abstract things could change. So if Cassie is going into you should do something different, but doesn't really have a plan, then that, again, you're right, is something that I don't like about the MCU that's just creeping its way into this movie.
I mean, the beginning of the movie, she gets arrested because she's protesting that they're kicking homeless people out of the park, and these are people who lost their homes because of the blip.
Okay, well, and again, cool concept, the blip, and they kind of talked about it a little bit in No Way Home and a little bit in Snowy Owl, and then kind of forgot it existed, except for that one scene in Black Widow and Yelena's backstory. But like, it's very strange how inconsistent the world building is, considering that it had been very tightly knit for like Phase 2 and 3.
Yeah. So, okay. That's why this movie isn't like the things you liked about Ant-Man movies. They're not there. The things I liked about the Ant-Man movies, at this point, the legacy characterness is firmly established. Like Hank Pym has no aspirations to be Ant-Man anymore. There was an opportunity here.
If he's just a one-line machine, then yeah, they're not using his character either.
Yeah, there was an opportunity here with Janet actually being a full character in the movie to maybe have more with like her passing on the torch or teaching her daughter how to use her Wasp suit powers, but that's never addressed at all. So that novelty's gone. I suppose there is the element with Cassie kind of coming into it and like learning how to use her suit and learn the powers.
There's no heist.
There's kind of a heist, but it's like all it amounts to is him shrinking. And it's like,
yeah, and I guess he didn't bring his friends into the quantum realm with him, so you don't have the great side characters that not just are good humor, but also they are they were instrumental to all the heisting.
Yeah.
Is there a sequence where his friend tells a story and you see a lot of flashbacks?
He's not even in the movie.
He's not at all?
Not at all.
Oh, man. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Where's the love for Baba Yaga?
Yeah, it feels like a very different movie. A lot of this movie is set in the quantum realm, so it's a lot of CGI, and a lot of it doesn't look that great, unfortunately. And
yeah, I saw MODOK, sorry, yeah. That did not look good.
No, it looked awful.
Looked like MODOK.
And then
you know what it looked like? It looked like that big face of George Lopez in Shark Girl and Lava Boy.
Oh.
That's what he looked like.
And this is where I bring up the Doomsday. Clearly, this movie was rushed because it was supposed to come out like several months after now. And I watched the end credits. There's like 13 different visual effects companies that worked on this movie. And the fact
Yeah,
that
that can't be good either.
so much of the movie takes place in like an all CGI environment, it felt more like a fantasy story, almost like Star Wars, rather than something
Yeah.
that takes place in the
And-
real
but
world.
but that's also a problem because like when you're trying to create a different world, right? Which is kind of, I guess, like this movie sounds like it does work a lot around the the quantum realm, and exploring it, right? Um, and so it kind of something like that would kind of need to be. I mean, I guess part of the quantum realm is that it changes a lot, but I don't know. It feels like if they had intentionally gotten like a bunch of different visual effects to do different parts of it, kind of like how, Spider-Verse has different art styles for each universe, that could have been cool. But if they just have a bunch of people working, trying to make a coherent project, that's a problem, right? Because, like, part of I mean, best world building in a movie, I think, ever, Lord of the Rings. There was so much detail because there was one company and one guy, like one art director, like a few people below Peter Jackson, but there was, one company all working together to make this coherent vision, right? And you need that if you want people to get invested into a new place. Or if it's completely random, just make it completely random and have like very intentional changes of pace between different parts.
Like it was all very creative. All the creatures they encounter and the environments they go into, like nothing was like unimpressive in that sense. But once again, we have a Marvel movie where I'm like, this is just not the movie I would have written. I wouldn't if I was given the job of writing a third Ant-Man movie, this is not the story I would have written. I would not have had them go into the quantum realm and spend the whole movie there. I give them credit for trying to do something different and not just do more of the same with these movies. But at the same time, this something different wasn't for my liking per se. And the one thing that everyone will say positive of this movie is Jonathan Majors as Kang, because we kind of got a taste for him in Loki, but he has a full-on presence here. And while most reviews I've seen, people are like, yeah, the movie wasn't that great, but Jonathan Majors was cool. Like he has a definitive stage presence as Kang. And you see a couple of his variants throughout the movie as well. So I'm at the very least, I don't think I have Marvel fatigue yet, but if I did, Jonathan Majors would be like the only remedy for it at this point.
Well, that bodes well, right? Because, you do want like investment in a villain. And that is part of what kind of is a problem. Like one of the problems a lot of the MCU product didn't necessarily have proper villains or good investment or people that we cared about. Or if it did, it kind of killed them off or made them lesser later on, like the Flag Smashers. So I don't know. It's probably a good thing and bodes well. But I don't know. It might be too little too late, right? It might be kind of like how Andor is great, but Star Wars has been losing a lot of its popularity, so they need to follow it up well. So it's good that he's a good villain, but they really need him in a popular project now, right?
Yeah, and he's going to be in Loki season 2, so that bodes well because I think Loki
That's
is one
true.
of the only universally praised things about Phase 4.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't love it. Now, if we try to make comparisons, it's like, all right, compare Phase 4 to Phase 1 of the MCU. This is now Phase 5, so we need to compare this to Phase 2. How did Phase 2 start? Iron Man 3, which
That's true.
a controversial movie. Like some people really like it and some really don't. And even though the movie itself wasn't that great, like they did kind of pick and choose elements from it to like help continue the story forward. So if I compare Iron Man 3 to Ant-Man 3, I would still have hope for Phase 5, I suppose, because Phase 2 didn't have a great start. And then, after Iron Man 3 was Thor: The Dark World. So they were able to make a comeback. Now, I mean, perhaps we're too far into the MCU now for that kind of comeback to happen.
Maybe, but also but before that, the end of Phase 1 was pretty great. Whereas, like, I don't know, the end of Phase 4 is meh.
Hey, the Guardians holiday special was hilarious.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
That's technically the last thing in Phase 4 because that came out like 2 weeks after Wakanda Forever was released.
Yeah. That's true. So yeah, no, there are things that bode well and that works out, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, so when I think about Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania, I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I actually saw it twice because 2 different friends wanted to see it at different times. And while I enjoyed myself watching the movie, once again, here I am saying this is not the story I would have written with these characters. Like even Scott and Hope, like they're supposed to be a couple at this point, and they hardly have any time together in the movie. Like we don't know anything more about the relationship, or they say I love you and kiss at one point in the movie, and you're like, this is like. Anyway, I would have done things differently. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'll give Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania 2.7 out of 4 bat cookies.
I'm gonna reserve my judgment and see if I actually watch it.
I'm telling you, Beeper, I would be shocked if you went and watched this movie and you're like, hey, I actually really like this one, because there's too many things that you don't like about the MCU right now, and there's too many things that you liked about the Ant-Man movies that aren't in this one. I would be shocked. Anyway, Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania is still in theaters. It's now it's not doing well. And this is again another warning sign from Marvel. It's like, get your act together, guys.
Yeah, otherwise you'll end up like DC.
And I'll admit, there is a small part of me that says maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe Marvel really screwing the pooch
is what DC needs to. I mean, the Batman was amazing, right? And is getting pretty big critical praise, even though, snuff for Best Picture. But I would not complain if this was a sudden reversal and Marvel started doing a few flops and DC started picking up the pace. I would actually much prefer a world where that's happening. So, maybe our bias is going to be rewarded finally.
And at the time of recording, the new Shazam movie will be coming out this week, so we'll see how well that does.
Yeah,
I'm hoping it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it. And have you watched the trailer for the Flash movie? I don't think I've talked to you about it since it came out.
Oh, I have seen parts of it, and I'm excited that Michael Keaton is in it. And that's about the extent of my excitement or cares about that movie.
Oh, gosh. All right, well, our next episode will come out on Tuesday, March 28th. So should we just say we're going to talk about Shazam at that point? I'm sure that's probably not a movie you're running out to the theaters to go see.
Probably not. But we can go for it.
All right. So come back to the Batchar podcast in 2 weeks when we talk about Shazam! Fury of the Gods.
Woo!
And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Shazam!